All right, so let's get started. So normally the way my demos work is that I do a lot of realistic business solutions. So I do implementation of business solutions in Azure, and normally I take real business use cases and I try to implement that. So this is a use case where we have it's the college system has a bunch of contacts and they want to be able to centralize basically their contact information. So if, for example, you're an external user or external person to the college, you can go into their system, search for maybe students or staff members and get information around that. So right now they have it in a disparate systems. They have it in multiple systems and they want to be able to centralize the database. So our job is to create a centralized database that stores and manages all contact information for the college. And we have to ensure that it's secure. We're going to be ingesting a bunch of data. We're going to expose some APIs and we're going to be using secure FTP to move big bulks of data because they're going to have a couple million records that they want to move into their system. Now, we're going to centralize the database not just for one particular college, but all the colleges in the United States, right? So that's what we're going to be focusing on. And actors here, we're going to have a couple of college administrators who are going to be focusing on uploading and updating the contact information. So it's not just from one spot, it's from multiple colleges we're going to put into that system. We're going to do an integration system which handles the data ingestion and processing into a storage account. Then the end user is going to be using querying the database to pull the data back out. Some of the benefits here are self-explanatory, centralization, flexibility, automation. If we decide to use automated automation to get additional information, scale, security, and also real-time reporting. And that's something that we can do after we put the data into our backend database. This is kind of a diagram that shows what we're going to be doing today. So college administrators will have an opportunity to upload large files. We're going to represent in this demo, we're going to be the college administrators. So we're going to represent that flow. The data is going to end up going into a newly provisioned Azure storage account, which we're going to show you how to build that in Azure. There's going to be a Azure Event Grid, which is basically a replication system that notifies our Azure Service Bus, which we're going to build as well. And we're going to have an Azure function, which is we're going to use to build. We're going to build as well. There's going to be our API that exposes us to upload data if we need to. Now the queue is basically the centralized spot. Everything has to go to a service bus because more data is coming in that we can process in the back end. So we have to store the data somewhere temporarily. And then there's going to be a function on the other side that's going to pull the data off and then it's going to write to a SQL database. Now, we're not going to get into Power BI because we may not have enough time for that, but if we do, we can. But the goal is that we want to put into a database here, then we're going to hand it back to the end user and say, hey, we're done. Can you please query the database and check to see if the information we're putting in there is correct? So this is basically just the scenario like I talked about. An administrator uploads a CSV file into a storage account. A function app will process the file, do some validation and sort it to a database. And this is basically the diagram that we're building out today. So this is just a flow diagram or that shows what systems we're going to be building. So what you see in the lightning bolts here, a couple of Azure functions, events. So you have one that was going to be for the SQL file transfer when we get there. That's the last step. And then we're going to have others that we're going to build out, which is the service bus, and we're going to build out the SQL database as well. There is a previous recording on this page, so I'm going to take this and put it in the chat. So if you want to go and look at it, you can. So I'm going to put this in chat for you to have a look at it. And then you can actually look at the previous recording if you missed anything here. So let me hide this. Some other things that if you haven't done data ingestion at all, or this is your first time doing anything with data, there's a couple of industry standard resources out there in Azure today that are big in the industry, right? So you have the Azure Data Factory, we have Databricks, and we have Synapse. Synapse, these are the three big ones that are being used today. Microsoft App Fabric is a new one that's coming out, but it's more geared towards BI or business intelligent users. And what we're trying to do is match what is based on the feature sets. We're trying to match what they have today in the other three resources in Azure. But the difference is that we're going to be building our own solution out, but we're going to make sure we have these key components that on the left side, key features on the left side that are available. So for obviously the purpose is to do data ingestion, ETL, and data orchestration, which is basically what we're going to show today. We're going to be running on what we call dedicated SQL pool. So we have to build our own database out, and then we can make sure we can elastically scale to handle any additional load that comes to the system. Our data ingestion, we're going to use we're going to be connecting to Azure Table Storage, and we're going to also be using Azure SQL. So technically, what we're doing here is that we're ingesting into two separate databases, a NoSQL database and a SQL database here for our data ingestion. And processing, we're going to have some ETL along the way, and ELT is what we do when we come out from our system, when we extract it from our backend system, and we want to do additional transformation before we present it to the UI. So that's kind of what we're going to show today as well. Programming languages, we're going to be focusing on T-SQL, which is and .NET. So .NET is the core orchestrator. Just T-SQL as well. We're going to be using that as a SQL. This is across most systems as well. Scale, we're going to be leveraging most of Microsoft's scalability features for Azure Function as well as a SQL database. So we don't have to worry about this. We just configure this as we go along. Compute is basically similar. It's just a matter of what kind of compute we're going to be using today. We're going to be using managed pools for Azure Functions. So Azure Functions is going to be shared, but it's going to have a pool of function apps that are going to be spun up as the load gets bigger. And we're going to use auto scaling for SQL. We see that as for provision in SQL. We see that auto scaling feature that's present. Azure services, some of the Azure services we're going to be using today, we're going to be using Azure Service, Azure SQL, which I mentioned before. We're going to be using Azure Blob Storage, which is going to be housing most of the files. We're going to be moving to Azure. Now, data movement is important because how are you going to slice the data? Because data comes in 100,000 records, a million records. We're moving it across a wire, so we want to make sure we can at least chunk it or slice it. So in that case, we're going to be copying large data sets, but we're also going to be slicing those large data sets into manageable chunks. Then we're going to actually push that out into our service bus, and that will end up in SQL. So this is kind of like a traditional way of moving data. This is called sharding. You heard that term called sharding. That's kind of similar to what we're going to be doing here. We're going to be breaking up large files into smaller chunks so they can get processed. Orchestration is getting, in that case, we're using event-based triggers. So you see that when a file gets dropped, someone gets triggered to let them know that the file is available for pickup. We don't have to do anything. Microsoft actually has triggers that are baked in into some of the capabilities. We're just going to leverage those capabilities that they have. Machine learning, we're not going to cover today, but also there's capabilities for that because this requires a training session by itself. And our UI we're going to be using today is going to be the portal. It's going to be a web-based SQL UI to actually do some of our queries and testing to make sure look at all our records and stuff here. Security is mostly based around if you do have a VNet integration in your company, you cannot integrate it into your environment. This allows your environment to be more secure. So we're going to do built-in security features, which is VNet support. We will talk about that. We're not going to implement it, but we'll talk about how you can implement VNet. And also, if you have identity, you can use RBAC as well to force role assignments. Use cases, self-explanatory. I'm not going to go into that. The cost structure, basically, in terms of money, is very important because what web provisions is going to be the cheapest solution that you can use, and you have to go to the pricing charts to look at other things like the Synapse, Azure Databricks, and Azure Data Factory. They're slightly more expensive because obviously Microsoft owns these resources, so the price is what they give you, and that's what it is. Because we're building our own, most of the resources we're going to be using today are going to be free. So that's kind of one of the advantages of going this route. Now, this just is self-explanatory. It's just a sequence diagram talking about the ADF ingestion, what we talked about. And then this is what Azure Databricks would look like if you decided to use Databricks to actually do your ingestion to SQL. So these are different flavors of ingestion. And then you have the Synapse option here, which is a little bit more intuitive because it does support PySpark notebooks, which can be used for your to build your pipeline as the data comes in. And you can use things like data frames to actually fine tune the data and extract it and push it out to either SQL or you can put it back into a storage account. Setup is fairly straightforward. We're going to be setting up our database, service bus, Azure Functions, a couple of triggers here along the way, and we're going to implement error handling, which is very important. Any APIs you expose, you also always have to make sure you have a way to capture any exceptions that come out from your system, so and you can remediate those as needed. And also, we're going to talk about monitoring and show how monitoring plays an important role in our APIs. And also, we're going to be doing some deployment through a CI/CD pipeline. So it's a lot to cover in an hour and a half. That's the reason I'm kind of going through it pretty quickly. And the rest here is just when we get to that point, we will just walk through the setups, the configurations, Other things we're going to be building out here, the service bus, we're going to talk about that. This is part of the implementation. So we're going to go through these steps as we're implementing. So things to talk about to get started, like if you're new to Azure, you need to go to the Microsoft Azure.microsoft.com. I'll recommend that you go there and just play around and you look around and see what offerings they have. Microsoft is good at adding new things to their credit line. So this is their $200 free credit. This does go up in numbers. I mean, initially when I started using this, I only had like maybe close to 50 services. Now they have up to 65 plus services available for free. You will get $200 in your account when you do sign up, and then you to minus over time if you use any resources that cost money. So this is an opportunity for you to explore additional resources that cost money, and then you can actually use up your $200 credit. After that, you get 12 months free. You have to go here for all the same services that they offer here. So you do have a year to at least play around and get your feet wet instead of Azure if you're interested in going this direction. Other things to pay attention to, we're going to be using Postman today for our demo. If you haven't used Postman before, I'll advise you to get familiar with it if you're in the API space. This is basically a free downloadable version. I'll normally use the web version because this is kept more up to date than the Windows. So I recommend using that. And what else? And finally, if you're a developer of any kind, or you're just interested in playing around inside of any development environments, the Microsoft offers a couple of free resources. Like so, Visual Studio 2022 is what they have today. They do offer the Community Professional and Enterprise Edition, but I recommend downloading the Community Edition because that is free, not just for download, but you can actually use it without paying, and it will cover most of the capabilities they are looking for development. VS Code is the other way to go. The advantage of VS Code over Community Edition is that this is very lightweight. So you can download it and get it installed in like 5 minutes. This takes about 30 to 40 minutes to install or even longer, depending on what kind of system you have. And they do support all the different operating systems, so you should be good to go if you wanted to use VS Code. And that's it. That's it. This documentation here talks about what we're building. We're doing what we call configuration driven developments, meaning that we're going to basically code like we do IAC in our config files. So we're not going to do any coding. Any business use cases that come out from there is going to be done through configuration. So the goal is that if there's a requirement or additional ask, we don't necessarily have to write any code. C Sharp does drive the orchestration engine that we're using today, but most of the changes that we're going to be making, as you will see during the demo, is through config files. Now, the advantage of using config files is the flexibility. One of the things I like about config since I got into this space was that we can make tweaks very quickly. You can get fast feedbacks. We don't have to debug our code. Uh, Code is very consistent. Maintenance is extremely low. And one of the advantages is that when you do deployments into a production environment, you can do always on. You're never really off. So it's like you don't have to take maintenance windows when you're making config changes because there's no downtime. He talks about maintenance here, separating configuration from code simplifies maintenance processes. I kind of glossed over that a little bit. Scale is very important because when you have configuration files, it allows your applications to scale across multiple systems without having to deploy your environments to different systems because you're just using the same system across multiple environments and you can have a centralized config files. Another advantage of configuration files, you can store them remotely, so you don't have to have them on the same physical server or the same Azure resource as your environment. You can have a HTTP call to them and pull that config file down. Testing and validation is pretty cool because it means you can do testing and validation in real time and it can showcase how that works. Domain specific customization is something that we talk about. We're going to be focusing mostly on data. So we're going to show you how we can connect two separate data sources using one RESTful API endpoint. And then we can test that way we can test in isolation. So we want to test a NoSQL database and maybe someone else is parallelly testing a SQL database connection string. And we're actually using the same API endpoints. There's no reason why we can't test them independently without having to push new code out. All right, so enough about the documentation. Let's start getting down to the implementation. So let's go up to the top and I will show you what we're building out. So today we're going to be building well, everything is built in C Sharp. So this is where the source code lives. So if you're new to VS Code, I'm sorry, if you're new to GitHub, so this is basically what it is. When you're new to GitHub, you can actually click on the code button here, and then you can fork the code down to your local environment. I recommend down opening it up in VS Code or forking it down to your local machine if you wanted to do that. So you can actually, a lot of people fork the code, so you can actually click here. You can actually fork the code down to your local machine or fork it into your own GitHub repository and pull it down that way. So you can actually keep up to date when you make changes here. The advantage of forking versus downloading is that if I make a change in your GitHub repository, you see those updates and you can pull that down. So you don't necessarily have to come back and get the latest code. You always have the latest code if you fork the code. It's much more easier to do that way. All right. And so when you do fork the code or download or actually do a get pull to your local machine, you will get something similar to this. So let me pull and bring that into scope here. Um, You have the config files here, which I mentioned to you before. This is where we're going to spend a lot of time in. There's a couple of schemas, representations here, database schemas here, which we're going to be using for our demo today. And then we have a couple of endpoints here, which is basically what we're going to be using to drive how our data moves. A lot of this code is boilerplate, so I don't expect you to really have to make any changes to the code. It should work out of the box. There's nothing specific to any line of business here. So it's just basically a boilerplate code that allows us to get into our APIs and use our orchestration flow. Now, how does this config file get executed by this piece of code down here in C Sharp? We have, if you're familiar with C Sharp of any kind or any kind of libraries, we have NuGet libraries that get pulled down instead of our project files. We have the standard ones that Microsoft gives you, and then we have a exclusive NuGet library here that we added to our system that gives us the capability to actually connect our C Sharp code, which to our config file and pull all the business logic from there. All right. So let's get into Azure. We'll go over here. If you're new to Azure, you go to the portal site, which is what I'm going to go to now. So go to portal.azure.com, and then you'll be forced to log in with a authenticated account. Now, if you have a Hotmail account, it will work. If you have a corporate account or you have a business account or what they call a work account, that's what they call it in Azure, you need to get one of these. So when you need either a Hotmail account or work account. In my case, I do have a work account, so that's what I'm logging into my system with. And then the top node of Azure should be your subscriptions. So subscription is the topmost node, and then I will give you your pricing of the current state of your subscription. And then in here you can get and it gives you a forecast. So if you look at if you're worried about pricing and your forecast, in this case, my forecast is at almost $400, and I think, okay, I don't want to spend that kind of money. I'll start spending resources down that I don't need. So Microsoft will give you forecasts immediately after you spin up resources, maybe about an hour or so. You start to see that here. And then you have a resource group. Your resource group basically tells you your resource groups tell you what resource group is in here. Now we don't have any right here because I just deleted the last one, but you can actually create a resource group here if you wanted to, or while you're doing your deployment in your function app, you can just take advantage of that step and then generate a resource group and then push the resources out at the same time. And that's what we're going to do today. So now this is empty. We can actually swing back to the VS Code that is on our local machine. Now, to get started with VS Code, you need a couple of